From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Thanks, Ollie. Thank you very much. Welcome to Monday's Richie Allen Show. 3 minutes past 5 it is. It's the 16th of December 2019. I've got two brilliant guests for you today. You join in on Twitter as usual. I look forward to reading your comments there. It is your Richie Allen Show. We're live right now on multiple platforms. Fab Radio 2 in Manchester being one of those. And as usual, I'm in good form and I'm looking forward to the programme. What about that?
Fabulous.
It's all good.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
I'm very excited about meeting Diane Denizen in the second hour of the programme. She's based in Munster, not far from my old stomping ground, Waterford. Diane arrived in Ireland back in the mid-1990s, having left Wales, and about 5 years ago got fully off the electricity grid. She's living off grid, and I'm very interested in that, but I'm also interested in the fact that during the period she arrived in Ireland, Diane underwent gender transition. Okay, she's a transgender woman, and I want to talk about puberty blocking drugs for children, and I want to get her thoughts on why trans issues are so dominant in the news cycle in 2019. I've been following Diane on Twitter for a couple of years. Very interesting she is, and I look forward to hearing from her in the second hour. Before that, Bcfm politics show host Tony Gosling is back on the programme. We said he would come back after the general election. He is going to sift through to rake over the dead embers of the Labour campaign. Tony Gosling joins your Richie Allen Show this hour. Yes, indeed. Lovely day today. Beautiful, bright, lovely, cloudless, freezing, but lovely. You know, once you can get from A to B, you know, that's how it is. Just before I came on, I noticed that the utterly ridiculous Uri Geller is trending. Yeah, a few years ago, Uri is a mentalist. He's a mentalist. And a few hours ago, he tweeted, "I met with Boris Johnson's team and I gave Boris Johnson a spoon which belonged to Golda Meir. I energised the spoon with positive energy as part of my strategy with the mind power of the hashtag UK public to ensure that Jeremy Corbyn did not end up as the Prime Minister." Uri Geller.
What kind of fuckery is this?
Jesus, huh? Must be tough being, I don't know. Must be tough when your career is behind you. Yeah, Uri Geller, I helped win the election for Boris Johnson by giving him a spoon that belonged to Golda Meir, former Israeli Prime Minister, yesteryear. Jesus wept, huh? Here's one that drove me mad today. Hallmark has apologised for pulling same-sex ads. I am sick to death of people apologising and reversing something. Right now, in this instance, I think Hallmark is right to apologise. What I mean is, I'm fed up to the back teeth of people reacting very quickly when they get a bit of criticism and then trying to appease their critics. Hallmark Cards chief executive has apologised for its decision to withdraw TV ads featuring same-sex couples. Now, don't be triggered, listen up. The company's cable network pulled the ads for wedding registry and planning site Zola. Now, Zola is a website where you can get your wedding planned top to bottom, right? Apparently, it's a very successful company. Why did they pull the ads? Well, they were told to do so by the conservative group 1 Million Moms. The decision was criticised on social media and there were calls for a boycott. If Zola contacts Hallmark and Zola says, "We've got loads of same-sex couples," excuse me, we've got loads of heterosexual couples, we've got plenty of that business, but we want to get some of the same-sex couple market. because there are a lot of same-sex couples getting married. And damn right too, if that's what they want to do. So Zola must have set the hallmark, listen, make an ad with a same-sex couple. But then the Conservative group complained, and idiotically, Hallmark pulled the ads. What is it with companies? They get a little bit of criticism, oh, right, we'll pull the ad. Morons. Anyway. Can't have your cake and eat it, by the way, Conservatives. Can't have your cake and eat it. You understand what I'm saying there, don't you? Yeah. Hey, let's have a bit of Flint versus Thornbury. Flint versus Thornbury. That's Caroline Flint, formerly of Labour, and Emily Thornbury, the shadow Foreign Secretary, both of them Labour women. Thornbury has said she's going to take legal action against the ex-Labour MP Caroline Flint over the alleged lie that Thornbury said that Leave voters were stupid. You see, Caroline Flint went on television yesterday. Oh, she was livid, having lost her seat, and she was blaming everybody, Jeremy Corbyn and everybody else. But she took aim at Emily Thornbury, and this is what Caroline Flint said about her that's led to the outburst from Thornbury.
She said to one of my colleagues, I'm glad my constituents aren't as stupid as yours. I'm sorry, it's not acceptable.
Right. Now, Emily Thornbury has designs on the leadership of the Labour Party. That could be devastating for her chances if it gets out there that she reckons that Brexit voters are stupid. So Emily Thornbury wasn't happy when she spoke to the media today.
One of my former colleagues came out and said the most extraordinary lies about me.
Hang on. This is too good not to fuck with it, so here we go. Oh, this is cold, this is icy. Emily Thornbury. In response to Caroline Flint. Thornbury.
How effective are the vaccines this year? Because
I couldn't organise a fucking piss up in a brewery. Let's try and do that again. I've ruined my gag. That's Mondays for you. Monday. Let's try it again. Oh, God loves a trier, apparently. Emily Thornbury.
One of my former colleagues came out and said the most extraordinary lies about me. I've contacted her and I've said to her, please withdraw, I'll give you to the end of the day. And she hasn't. So I've had to go to solicitors. I mean, people can slack me off. As long as it's true, I'll take it on the chin. But they can't make up about me. And if they do, I have to take it to the courts.
They can't make up shit about me, says Emily Thornbury. I'd say she absolutely lost it when she saw Flint's interview yesterday, eh? I'd say she lost it. She rang her up. Flint! What the bloody hell? I've got no chance of getting elected as the next Labour leader even now. Yeah, it's Monday, isn't it? It's Monday. 11 and a half minutes past the hour. Your children could kill their grandparents. Apparently, every network has been running infomercials for Merck today. We need to give the kiddies the flu jab. Otherwise, they could develop into, they could become super spreaders. I kid you not.
let's talk about flu. How are you feeling at the moment? 9 days to...
I'm feeling great. This is BBC Radio 5, by the way. Should have said this. And Rachel Burden.
Let's talk about flu. How are you feeling at the moment? 9 days to go till Christmas. England's top doctors strongly advising people to protect themselves and their families from the flu. NHS England say figures show a rise in people visiting their GP with flu-like symptoms in the last couple of weeks. So what is the best way to protect yourself? Professor Martin Marshall, Chair of the Royal College of GPs, is here with some advice. Good morning to you, Martin.
Marty Marshall now, Chair of the Royal College of GPs. Marty Marshall.
Good morning.
First of all, don't go to the doctor if you've got flu, presumably. There's nothing they can do.
Nothing they can do, full stop.
No, that's right. Flu's a horrible illness for people who get it, but it isn't life-threatening for most people. Stay at home, drink plenty of fluids, make sure that you look after yourself. Only if you're in one of those high-risk groups do you need to be really concerned, and that's children, elderly people, people who've got long-term conditions, and pregnant women.
OK. Advice taken on all of that. And the difference between a bad cold and flu is, with flu, you just can't get out of bed, can you?
No, exactly. You know it when you've got it. You feel really terrible, aches all over your body. You really can't get out of bed, high fevers often. So, yeah, it's very different from a common cold.
I'm taking my 3-year-old to get his nasal flu spray vaccine this afternoon. It's offered to all under 5s now, or is it all primary school children?
It's all primary school children it's available to, and we're actively encouraging that because the proportion of children who are getting the vaccination is much lower this year than it has been in the past. So that's a big concern because children are what they call super spreaders. They go, they talk to people, they give people hugs. They're the most likely to spread the flu bug around older people in particular.
Yeah, and they've just got snot everywhere, haven't they? I mean, it's no wild guess to see why it spread so quickly from them. And the reason I always think it's a good idea to get them vaccinated is not particularly for them, but for their grandparents, actually. That's why we do it.
That sounded very much like propaganda there from the BBC presenter, didn't it? Or is it just me? Didn't that sound very much like a bit of propaganda there at the end?
Flu bug around older people in particular.
Yeah, and they've just got snot everywhere, haven't they? I mean, it's no...
Listen to what she says.
It's no wild guess to see why it spread so quickly from them. And the reason I always think it's a good idea to get them vaccinated is not particularly for them, but for their grandparents, actually. That's why we do it.
She's playing her part. They're like Torval and Dean there, Rene and Renato. It's a great duet going on between the BBC presenter and Marty Marshall from the Royal College of GPs. This is rubbish, this. It really is, right? It's garbage. But to be fair to Burley, she did what to be fair to Burden, she managed to do that which Kay Burley couldn't do. She did at least ask about the efficacy of flu shots because we know it doesn't work very often. At least she asks. How effective are the vaccines this year? Because obviously it varies from year to year, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yeah, that's right. There are many different strains of flu virus, and those strains do change. They do mutate. So sometimes the vaccines are more effective, sometimes less effective. This year, it looks like This year, it looks like. Now, last year's flu vaccine didn't work. And it very often doesn't work. It's just not the right one. But listen to what he says here. This year, it looks like the manufacturer's done a really good job.
It looks like. How the frig does he know? It's December 16th, 2019. We have not entered flu season. We haven't. How does he know that the manufacturers have done a good job? Unless somebody told him to say that. He can't say that, and she needs to challenge it. She needs to say, how do you know? It's a bit early to say, right?
Has done a really good job. They seem to have picked out the main virus strains which are likely to cause the problem. They're in the vaccine, so they really should be used.
Yeah, just take my word for it, says Marty Marshall. She should, of course, say to him, how do you know? Bit early? Where are you getting that information from? Is it on a Merck leaflet? And then, incredibly, you're going to find this hard to believe. I think you'll find it hard to believe. I think you will. This guy, Marty Marshall, is obviously a quack. He says preventative measures, well, they just don't work, he says.
And what about preventative measures, just looking after yourself? Do you take echinacea, for example? Do you try and up your vitamin C intake, honey and lemon, loads of oranges? What do you do?
Well, I look after myself, so I keep fit, I eat a good diet, I don't smoke. So I generally look after myself. All of those other measures that you've mentioned, there isn't very much evidence that they work, but they don't cause any harm either. If you want to do them by all means. They don't really make...
What was that? What did he say there?
That you've mentioned, there isn't very much evidence that they work. So I generally look after myself. All of those other measures that you've mentioned, there isn't very much evidence that they work, but they don't cause any harm either. If you want to do them by all means.
He should be struck off for that.
They don't really make an enormous difference. The most important thing is to make sure you use proper hygiene measures and make sure that you get vaccinated.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, Professor Martin Marshall, there, Chair of the Royal College of GPs. Look after yourselves. You know, basically get rest. Don't drink too much.
Like you've
Don't
been
eat
doing.
rubbish. You know, great going into Christmas. We're all on board with that one then, aren't we?
Yeah. The BBC approach to anything that comes from the World Health Organization is pretty simple.
All right, move on. Nothing to see here. Please disperse. Nothing to see here, please.
Yeah, the preventative measures, well, they just don't work. Taking vitamin C, getting a lot of fresh air, eating certain foods. They just don't work, says the quack the BBC brought on to shill for Merck. Yes, let's get all the kiddies taking their vaccines because they're super spreaders. And they seem to have got it right this year. It seems like it's the right one. So get all your kids, get their sleeves rolled up. Well, in the case of children, of course, they normally take it through their nose, don't they? Ah, the BBC. Speaking of the BBC, Labour MP Andy MacDonald was on the very same channel this morning, Radio 5 Live. And Labour are digging a trench, at least some of the Momentum Labour people. Jeremy Corbyn supporters. They're digging a trench and they are blaming the media and the BBC for its portrayal of Jeremy Corbyn. They're blaming the BBC's portrayal of Corbyn for its abysmal showing in the election last week. Here's Andy MacDonald, Labour MP from Middlesbrough, speaking with the BBC 5 Live presenter Chris Warburton.
I've never in my lifetime known any single individual so demonised and vilified, grotesquely and so unfairly. And it even came to it in this election just in the last few days of it, where there were posters in my locality of portraying Jeremy Corbyn as a paedophile, saying, would you trust your children to this man? And when you know somebody, as I do, and I've got to know Jeremy very well over these years, and I know him to be a good man, and to see him abused in that way, I find it incredibly cruel. There are pages and pages. You had the Prime Minister of the country putting a front page article on the Telegraph comparing him to Joseph Stalin and the slaughter of millions of kulaks. He's been vilified as an anti-Semite.
Well, but then there's all of the we don't need to go over it all again. But there was broad suggestions he was very ineffective at dealing with anti-Semitism, for example.
You raise the issue with me, and then say to me, "Don't go over it again." Now, which way do you want it? Because this is the difficulty we have with the media. We know we've got the forces of the establishment, the elite, rained against us. And we've always had the print media, which is page after page of press barons absolutely destroying and vilifying Labour leaders from time immemorial. What's changed in this election is the way the broadcast media have joined in with that battle. And you know that we have a catalogue of complaints against our public service broadcaster, our precious BBC, which I'm afraid has been brought into the fray.
Let me make a point as well. Let me make a point as well. Isn't this the final place that you go to for blame when things haven't worked out for you? Rather than leadership, rather than policies, ineffective on anti-Semitism, taking an awfully long time to develop a position on Brexit, all of those other things.
Yeah, a bit fractious there between Chris Warburton and Andy MacDonald. Right. Okay. Tony Gosling will have more on this in a minute when he joins us. It's exactly 20 minutes past the hour. Let's have some music. I've not got any music lined up, actually. I'm just going to have to grab something and hope that it's palatable. Yeah, that'll do. Deacon Blue will do. Deacon Blue then on your Richie Allen Show. Tony Gosling next to rake over the embers of the Labour election campaign 2019. Welcome to the programme. Yeah. Deacon Blue on the Richie Allen Show. Lots of chat going on Twitter. Welcome to the programme. Thanks for using Twitter to chat amongst yourselves there. Indignity. Jeremy Corbyn there, says Mark. Thinking of another Deacon Blue song. Jezza built a ship called Indignity. And not surprisingly, it sank, says Mark. Yes, dreadful times. Dreadful for those who believed in him. And I've never been an I told you so merchant. Never have been. There's no good comes of that. You know? No good comes of it. So you just hope that as time goes on, more people come to the conclusion that they're screwed. Either way. And that they've got to move away from it. You know, in order to build something a bit different. Let's get Tony on. He's standing by is Tony Gosling. He is the host of the Politics Show on Bcfm in Bristol. As you know, I think very highly of it. It's a very, very good show. I've said it 1,000 times. Former BBC journalist as well. And he's somebody whose opinions I seek out. I love listening to him and I love reading him. You can follow him on Twitter as well. Just look for Tony Gosling on Twitter. There's only one. Tony, welcome back, and thanks for giving us your time today. I really appreciate it. How are you?
All right, not too bad. Yes, I'm rather feeling I kind of called the election right.
You got it spot on.
I'm not very popular amongst a lot of the Labour people.
No, you got it spot on. I wanted to first of all ask you, a number of Jeremy Corbyn's friends, including Andy MacDonald on BBC Radio 5 today, they've decided to dig a trench for themselves and to blame the media portrayal of Corbyn, saying as much as, wait, I tell you this, saying that when they were knocking on doors, people were saying to them, IRA sympathiser and friend of the UK's enemies. And Andy MacDonald said, basically this morning, he blamed the BBC for that, live on air with Chris Warburton, said it's your fault because you put that idea in people's heads. Is there any merit to that argument?
Well, I don't think there is a lot, actually, because I've seen an enormous, very, very instant push as soon as the result was out on Friday morning for people like Margaret Hodge and the rest of them to go on the offensive immediately in order to try and shift the blame away from the right wing of the Labour Party, her, for example, and all these ridiculous accusations of anti-Semitism, and the general Blairite factions, the people that forced strong-arm Corbyn into taking a Remain position, and to force the blame onto Corbyn himself. So to make this an issue not about the Blairites in the Labour Party, who control most of the members of Parliament, of course, but to try and blame Corbyn himself. Now, of course, it is Corbyn's fault, but it's not the position that he took. It's the fact that he just tried to be too friendly to everybody. He wasn't really anywhere near tough enough with his own enemies in his own party.
Why wasn't he, Tony? You and I have had this conversation before. When he was elected, I wasn't speaking with you at that. Well, obviously you were a regular guest. When he was elected, I warned my listeners who were thrilled. I warned them at the time. I said he will do nothing, he will say nothing, and he will achieve nothing. Why? Why is it that this guy who spoke about the crimes of the British Empire, the crimes of the current British military-industrial complex, who talked about Israel and Gaza, why did this guy keep stum in the 4 years that he held the biggest job in the party?
Well, let's just face it, the guy's too weak to be a leader, and in fact, in a way, he deserves to have lost. But I mean, this has been a deliberate tactic to undermine him from within his own party, and he needed to be strong to stand up to that. He just wasn't anywhere near strong enough. Yeah. And it was Neil Clark writing on the RT website, where I had a column up until about 4 or 5 years ago. His article, he points out this fact I've not seen mentioned anywhere in the British press. It's amazing, isn't it? We can't get anyone in the British press who's sort of analysing. But basically, a really important fact is Corbyn was treating his enemies better than his friends.
Yeah.
The people who is his allies within the Labour Party, like Chris Williamson and Ken Livingstone, well, how did they get treated? Well, they got booted out of the party on lies and pretexts or whatever that Corbyn was forced or agreed to go along with. And those that were actually undermining him, I don't know if you've seen that article about Mandelson, Richie, from I think it was about 2016, 2017, no, maybe 2017, saying that I work to undermine Jeremy Corbyn every single day. And this was a quote from Mandelson, a headline in The Guardian. Now, so far as I'm concerned, Mandelson should have been booted out of the party at that point. But it's okay, it seems, to undermine the leader of the party and say appalling things about them, where you're supposed to actually be opposing the government, not your own opposition. And I think Boris has shown how to deal with people like that. What happened when his rebels rebelled against him back a couple of months ago?
Yeah, he took the whip.
It was next morning, you're all out, boys and girls.
Yeah.
And by the way, you're not standing in the next election, whenever it happens to be. You're not standing on my little blue ticket. And so, of course, all those people have now been removed very effectively and efficiently. And Corbyn should be learning lessons. But there's loads of people, of course, including Corbyn and MacDonald, who just don't want to learn those lessons because it's just a bit too much to stomach that they got it so horrendously wrong.
Here's I'm not going to do justice to what Tim Stanley was trying to say, but I'm going to try and very, very, very quickly in a few seconds paraphrase it. Stanley has a brilliant opinion piece in the Telegraph this morning, and he didn't pile in with all the anti-Semitism nonsense to his credit, even though his colleagues at the Telegraph were very happy to do so. Stanley said this morning in his piece, he said, look, one of the things that McDonnell and Corbyn and Andy McDonnell and Rebecca Long-Bailey and Thornbury and all the rest of them, Keir Starmer, failed to realise is that ordinary men and women, like I'm an ordinary bloke, Tony. I'm an ordinary working class bloke from Waterford, trade unionist family. I'm an ordinary bloke. And what Tim Stanley said was, the party failed to realise that working class people were not on board with this progressive politics agenda, this vulnerable group, minority group agenda, constantly harping on about the need for people to self-identify as trans, constantly harping on about the need to deplatform people and stop them speaking. Stanley said they got it horribly wrong because ordinary men and women are just not on board with that. They don't like it. I think Stanley made a good point. What do you think?
No, I agree. I think the thing is, a lot of these so-called progressive ideas that have been coming from the right of the party, largely, not just the hard left, definitely, more from the right. These are the things which I think have failed to appeal to voters.
Yeah.
I mean, for them to lose in the most spectacular fashion since the 1930s is a real disaster. But what you've got within, I'm afraid, still within the left, is you've got very entrenched views, people who are simply not prepared to learn, not interested in learning. They're looking at capitalising, if you want, on their own failure and their own sabotage of their own party to try and stick the knife in further into the people they've been sabotaging. This is what happens when Corbyn is failed to deal with the problems and the saboteurs within his own party. What he's done is he's actually made them much, much stronger. And they're now actually, in their own delusions, people like Margaret Hodge believe that they are actually now running things and in charge, even though they were responsible for the defeat largely. I mean, the economic programme that Labour put forward is perfectly reasonable. I mean, there's a lot of commentators saying, oh, it was just unbelievable, this sort of thing. And my experience talking to Labour voters here in the city of Bristol has been that they liked Corbyn, but the main reason was basically just to do with Brexit, simple as that he had an incoherent position on Brexit. I don't think, many people vote on things like transgender issues and things like that, but those issues have been used here in Bristol to make sure that the traditional Corbyn allies, some specific individuals which I won't name, have been excluded from being allowed to stand as councillors or as mayor candidates in various elections in the city. So they can stay as Labour Party members, all right, but because they've taken a position on transgender politics or whatever, they are not allowed to stand as candidates. So the Labour Party's got this very, I think, toxic mix within itself, which is trying to turn it into a specific type of party which will never, I don't think, appeal to the vast majority of working class people, Richie. And that, I think, is actually exactly what they're planning. They are saboteurs. And if you're going to be a leader like Corbyn, who's a socialist, a lefty, and going to allow the saboteurs to grow, to pat them on the back and say, oh, well, we are a broad church, this sort of silly thing, then I mean, he's been part of the demise of the left in the Labour Party. And it's been 40 years, at least 40 years, since Harold Wilson, and the last real left-wing leader of the Labour Party who actually made it to Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Probably 35 since Michael Foot, something like that, who was another real left-wing leader. But since then, there's been none. And Corbyn has just blown it, maybe for another 35, 40 years.
That's a very good point you make there, because it's going to be a Rebecca Long-Bailey, Lisa Nandy type that's going to take the party into the next few years. You've had a number of people like Glenn McCluskey, of course, the union boss. You've had Andy McDonald today, I mentioned him, and they're all saying, well, it's got to be a woman, it's got to be a northerner. You've got Jess Phillips' name in the mix there. Johnson must be laughing his backside off, as we say in Ireland, because what you're going to get with one of those people is more of this ludicrous, inclusive, progressive agenda nonsense that the public seems to be sick and tired of. So the defeat in 2024, Tony, well, it might make this one look like it was a close run thing. They could end up with 400 seats in 5 years' time, the Tories.
Well, I mean, they've had all sorts of trouble in Scotland, and the SNP have really shown the way to do it. They've got to actually have a proper socialist programme, and of course, you've got the Blairites in the Labour Party are just stopping that. I actually had an exchange of messages with John McDonnell earlier about Rebecca Long Bailey, because I saw this story in the Eye. They seem to be the first newspaper to break it for a change. Yeah. The Eye paper, about her being the sort of chosen person. One, by McDonnell and Corbyn as their successor, because these people always want to say, well, I think this person should be taking over from me. But then, of course, with such a terrible election result, that could actually be a kind of curse on that person. Most of the membership might think, no, we don't want that. But then again, they might actually quite like the flavour of McDonnell. It's really difficult to tell the way the Labour Party is going to vote on this for the new membership. But anyway, I got a reply from John saying, do not underestimate Becky. I mean, quite clearly he's saying, yes, she is our favourite candidate. It's not just a rumour. And it looks as if she's the one they're going to be definitely pushing. But what I also said to him was, look, what is all this stuff about it's got to be a woman? This is just as sexist as the sort of stuff we've been hearing, for many years from the feminists. You should be picking the best person for the job, whether it's a man or a woman. It's insane to say it's got to be a woman. What are you doing? You could be getting rid of half of your very best candidates to lead you into the next general election.
Hey, do you know what? I agree with you completely, but on saying, because I've been a big critic of Rebecca Long Bailey only because she's the Salford Eccles MP. She's basically my MP. But to be fair to her, of the also-rans, of the usual suspects, she's fairly good on... I totally disagree with everything she says and stands for, but she's brilliant on the stump. She's a terrific public speaker. And I reckon her flaring up against Johnson would be pure theatre. She's very good. She's got an enormous mouth. I mean, if I open the window now, we'll probably be able to hear her tea. I'm pretty sure we will, in fact. But I reckon she's the best of a bad bunch.
One of the criteria here is that she's got to be good at Prime Minister's questions. Yeah. Because a lot of this is thinking on your feet. Corbyn was a bit pedestrian. He started off with this idea that he was going to ask a question that someone had emailed into him every week at PMQs, and that actually went quite well. And it sounded really good. I've got a letter from such and such. This is what they want to know. But then he just sort of seemed to forget about that halfway. A couple of years ago. If he'd have kept with it, I think people would be able to have taken him a bit more seriously. But I'm not sure that Rebecca Long Bailey is the person that needs to do what needs doing, and that is an absolute 100% purge of all those people who spent more time attacking their own party during the election campaign and in the run-up to it, certainly during the last year or so, particularly over the whole Brexit issue and turning the party into a Remain party. All those lot have got to go.
Can I just say this, Tony? Sorry to interrupt you. Can I just say this? I don't blame them for the Brexit mess. I blame him. He's a trade unionist. He's been a campaigner against the European Union his entire life. What he could have said back in 2015, the year before the referendum, and what he could have said in 2016, he could have stood there and proudly proclaimed himself a leaver. He could have said, listen, Labour Party's a broad church and I understand that. I've got some MPs, they want to stay in. Listen, I believe we should leave and I'll tell you why. Forget about bigotry against people from other parts of the world. Forget all that. It's not about that. It's about the rights of workers. It's about people with no skills or semi-skilled people being screwed over by the European Union. I'm not in favour of it. It's a dreadful thing. Do you know what I would have said if I was Corbyn? I would have said, look what they did to David Cameron. Cameron went over there, tried to get some sort of reforms. They laughed in his face and they sent him back across the English Channel. So as Jeremy Corbyn, I'm saying, I'm campaigning to leave. I think we should leave, and the rest of the party can do whatever they bloody well want. But I'm campaigning to leave. That's all he had to do, Tony, and that's not unreasonable.
Well, of course, you're right. And, by doing all this, he's gone against his instincts and he's not been true to himself. The other thing I say about who makes a good leader, it's got to be somebody who speaks from the heart. If you look at any political speaker, you'll see some of them just simply read out pre-prepared speeches and some of them are able to think on their feet. You find this out really during these live debates quite a lot. But, that's something I'm really not sure about Rebecca Long Bailey, what you think, whether she's good at that, but that's an absolute essential. You can't have someone who stood there reading from a lectern or from an auto cue running the country. You've got to have someone who who can think on their feet and speak from the heart, Richie.
Bailey is good in hostile interviews. That's the reason why because I hammer Bailey a lot, even in the early morning live streams. I give her a bit of stick, mostly because she's very loud. Pot calling the kettle black maybe, but it's one of the reasons I give her a bit of stick. But yeah, listen, tell me this. Tony Gosling is our guest, by the way. Thisweek.org.uk, the politics show, Bcfm, is a must listen, folks. It really is. I know many of you do listen to it, and you regard Tony even very highly. I had an email earlier on from somebody who said, don't mention me, Rich. Love Tony. I was desperately hoping that Corbyn would win, because I'm very much down on my luck at the moment, and I am on unemployment assistance. I'm on some of these benefits. Do I have to worry now that they've got a blank check, as it were, for the next few years, the Conservative Party? Should people who are on the margins, should they be worried, Tony?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, you know, particularly travellers and gypsies, people like that, they're going to be hammered, it looks like. I mean, that's certainly part of the manifesto, is to bring in more criminal charges against, in fact, change the law to further criminalise gypsies and travellers. Now, for many hundreds of thousands of young people, they realise that they cannot afford to pay an extortionate rent wherever they are, usually in the south of England somewhere. So many have decided to go either to become barge dwellers or river dwellers, get a boat and live on a boat, or else live in a caravan, and of course then there's also the traditional gypsies and the English travellers, the Irish travellers, who've been doing this for many years. But this is a major plank, it seems, it's in the manifesto. We're going to give the police powers to confiscate caravans, to confiscate all goods, this sort of thing. So, I mean, it's the normal Tory thing, and of course it's the politics of hate, this. It really is, and the politics of envy. So the idea is that this works. This gets the Tories votes. And what happens is there's lots and lots of millions of people out there who have gotten themselves into horrendous debt, and they're paying horrific mortgages, and they're really not enjoying it. And what irks them more than anything else is to see someone go by with a carefree, happy-go-lucky attitude who's not paying any rent and living in a caravan. And this is one of the things that they've really done over the last, again, 30 years or so, really, since the Criminal Justice Act back in the early 1990s, is to try and criminalise any sort of lifestyle that isn't paying an absolute fortune, an arm and a leg, just to live in a shoebox. So that's part of the Tory mindset, is that they want to punish these people who show the people who live in houses and pay rents and mortgages. The mortgage, of course, is this French term, the grip of death is what it means in French, the mortgage. And they want to show them that there is no other way to live, that they're going to have to pay their mortgage and forget about any alternative. So that's a really particularly cruel part of this new Tory manifesto.
Tony Gosling is our guest. So much I want to get through with you before we get to the top of the hour. Two things. I don't often get hunches. I'm not the greatest guy to get a hunch. But I had a hunch this morning. One or two Tory MPs were on television and radio talking about looking at the licence fee and decriminalising not having one because it's going to free up the courts. And I got a little bit of a chill, Tony, because what I heard was one of the Tory MPs who was on TV this morning, he said, well, lots of other companies, they have their own way of collecting money they are owed, debts. And I thought, Jesus Christ, what has he just said there? Has he said we'll do away with the criminal, the law courts dealing with the licences, and we will allow the BBC, if they choose, to employ recovery firms to go after people? I think that's what they mean, Tony. Isn't it?
Well, maybe they do. I mean, yes, and also it's good to hear you defending the BBC a bit here, Richie. I mean, you have to remember, not all of the licence fee goes towards the appalling programmes that go out on network radio and Radio 4, etc. Yeah. There's an increasing amount of money that goes from the licence fee to pay for what are called local democracy reporters right across Britain. So all of the local newspapers across the country have got local democracy reporters that are going in and they do a bit for the BBC and they also file copy for the local newspapers. Now, quite a lot of times, I mean, particularly here in Bristol, you wouldn't know of the potential corruption going on within city councils and at City Hall if it wasn't for these guys in there sitting through boring meetings and reporting on strange items on the agenda, maybe little missing amounts on balance sheets going through on council papers and this sort of thing. So what the BBC are providing really is still quite important. And the other thing is, if the BBC were to go, then what would happen is you'd just have people like Sky, Comcast, you'd have the other networks, the commercial networks, Channel 4 News, ruling the roost. So the BBC is there really to try to, and of course increasingly it's not doing that good a job, but it's still in the regions pretty good, is to do the basic bog standard journalism, public interest journalism, to make sure that stuff does get reported. And quite often I've come across individuals who have said, well, we went to X, Y and Z, and eventually we went to the local BBC radio station or to the regional BBC television reporters, and that was finally where we actually got our story covered. Nobody else was interested. I mean, I've also heard the opposite, just to be fair, today from Ian Puddick. I don't know if you've come across him in London. He's just done an interview with a Royal Protection Officer, which is brilliant, he's well worth having a look at, and I'll tweet that to you after we finish speaking if you want. And this Royal Protection Officer is a brilliant interview, and he says to Ian, as part of this interview, he said, well, I did this interview, it's about Prince Andrew and various other things that went on within Buckingham Palace, etc. It's a fascinating chat. And he said, well, I went to the BBC Panorama with it and Channel 4 dispatches. Eventually, the BBC Panorama offered me a much better chance of getting it out to the public. He wasn't particularly interested in the money, apparently. And then, of course, he did an interview with Panorama a while ago, and then they've done nothing with it. And then it doesn't look as if they're going to do anything with it. And they've now gone cold on him. So this is another real, I mean, this is the power of the broadcasters, is literally the Savile power is and exactly the same happened with the victims of Jimmy Savile, is they were interviewed by the BBC, by Newsnight in that case, by my old friend Liz McKean, and then she found it impossible to actually get them out through that programme, and so actually had to go elsewhere in order to get the story covered. Eventually it was through the Oldie magazine, and then the Oldie magazine, about 6 months later, they sacked their editor. So there is a very strong and constant attempt within the UK, particularly the London media, to stop these stories coming out. And I think it's well worth it that Ian has done this interview, and at least it's going to get out one way or another. But we cannot trust these mainstream broadcasters to criticise the establishment, not least of which because you've got big financial figures chairing the BBC nowadays. For the last 10 years or so, all the chairs of the BBC have been straight from the City of London.
All from the City of London. You're absolutely right. Tony Gosling is our guest, and you made a good point too about the regional BBC report. It's a very good point, Tony, because if they didn't do that, you can't depend on the Global and Bauer stations to do it, because Global and Bauer, as you and I talked about for many, many years, going back to my days in Spain, they destroyed local radio, didn't they? They hoovered up every local radio station in the country and prevented those formerly regional radio stations, which were owned by local businessmen and businesswomen who used to do that. I started off at WLR-FM, which is still a very, very successful radio station in Waterford in Ireland. And that's what the newsroom did. You know, they were at every county council and city council meeting, challenging what was being said, recording it, getting it to the people. And if those stations were to go and were to be bought by a massive conglomerate, well, who's going to do that job? You make an excellent point. Tony Gosling is our guest. We're coming up to 9 minutes or 10 minutes even to the top of the hour, the politics show Bcfm. Maybe we have to figure it out. Maybe we have to accept, Tony, there's no reform in political parties. There's no getting real socialist leaders to the helm of political parties. What we need to come to an understanding of, as difficult and as scary as it is, this is my old chestnut. You've been listening to me banging on about this for years. We can never change anything through the political system. We can't, Tony. When are we going to accept that? Corbyn has proved it.
Well, I don't agree. I'm sorry, but I just don't agree. I think Corbyn was the wrong person for that job. He just didn't do it very well. I mean, really what people should do is they should look, honestly reflect on these things and learn and do it different and do it better next time. Now, look, the people like Margaret Hodge have not given up. She is on the attack and fighting to try and get her narrative and her agenda accepted as the reason why the election was lost. But, the people on the Corbyn left side, the people who want social justice in this country, they want a fair deal for the poor, etc., they have got to get on the offensive too. They can't just sit back and say, oh dear, what a shame, blah, blah. They need to take the fight to her. So, it's a political fight. And if you give up and walk away, of course you're not going to win. I think there has to be, a very positive attitude within the Labour Party. People can get very, very active. If they don't, what's going to happen is all the hundreds of thousands of members that have joined in the last 5, 6, 7 years, they are going to just leave again. And you need to be able to have a bit of faith that the membership want to see a socialist party, and I think they do. And what we're hearing, of course, in most of the media from all these Blairites, Margaret Hodge, etc., is that they don't, and that the main thing to think about is anti-Semitism. Nonsense. There's no anti-Semitism to speak of, really. Hardly at all in the Labour Party. The whole thing is the emperor's new clothes. Come on, Margaret, we can see right through them.
We live in a constitutional monarchy. We don't live in a democracy. So Jeremy Corbyn would have gone back, or will go back again this week, and he will take the oath of allegiance to Queen Elizabeth II and all her heirs. It's a sham, Tony, isn't it? This is why I keep banging on about it. It's a sham. We don't live in a democracy. It's a constitutional monarchy. It's a myth.
Well, it is, but I mean, it all depends on the character of the Queen. The Queen is very, very wealthy, but I don't see her as with two little, red horns sticking out through her crown. She's not a totally evil person. I mean, we've seen also, you're absolutely right to talk about the head of state, because, of course, it's extremely important who they are. We're now in the position that we've been told just a couple of weeks ago that the head of state may change in 18 months. This is a leak from the palace, and that we will probably be seeing Prince Charles taking over in 18 months to be Prince Consort along with Camilla. And I did speak to you last time about the Epstein scandal and Prince Andrew, suggesting that the attacks on Andrew are really just an attempt to character assassinate him, so he can take no part in any discussion about who succeeds the Queen. Because I don't think, he's a bit of a duffer, really. He comes across as a bit of a bully and a twit. So that, I think, is a large part of what's going on at the moment. There's also a manoeuvring by Prince Charles, and Charles and William, I noticed just the other day, are saying, well, we've got to trim down the royal family and have less, of course. And they're not going to trim themselves down, are they? They're just trying to consolidate power. That's all they're doing, and trying to make sure that Charles can take over. I don't know if he's going to do a very good job. Certainly Diana, who I believe was murdered in Paris, and of course Charles would know that. I would also imagine that he took some part in that, not actually physically doing it, but being involved with the replacement of the MI6 station chief in Paris just a few weeks before,
that's right.
And putting Gerard Cowper-Coles in charge, who then went on to become after that to go out of MI6 and become one of the chairs of BAE Systems, the arms manufacturer. So, I think that Charles is, he's not going to be a popular leader. And so therefore there is a lot of manoeuvring, I think, right now to make sure that that all happens as smoothly as possible. Of course, I don't think it will be particularly smooth, and I don't think he'll be as successful or as popular as the Queen's been.
Yeah, and hopefully at that stage the British people will wake up to it and get rid of them, turf them all out, every one of them, and the history of them, get it all out. Tony Gosling is our guest. Just a couple of minutes left. Tony, I've done programmes upon programmes with historians that talked about these families, these European royal families, how they intermarried with some of the biggest financial families of the last millennium even, and how they sold us the big red herring of democracy. When they realised that people were waking up to who was ruling them, let's give them democracy. We're talking about the biggest private landowner on planet Earth. I totally respect you not characterising the Queen as evil, but I think what she represents is evil that's almost unimaginable. I mean, you look at the paedophilia, you look at the how close into that circle Jimmy Savile was. We know what Mountbatten was. They love a good paedophile there as well. But look, I respect what you said on that. Brexit then, Tony, just to finish with this, just for a couple of minutes. It's a whopper of a lie by Boris Johnson, isn't it, to say that he will properly leave the European Union and that a trade deal will be done, and it'll all be done and dusted by this time next year, 2020. That's got to be a lie, right?
Well, I don't know. I've really no idea. I'm sorry to say. It depends who he puts in charge of this process. There are some very good people. I would suggest people like Steve Baker, David Davis could be in charge of that process, and then they might actually squeeze quite a good deal out. I mean, both of them have said very clearly that the problem in the past has been that the civil servants insist on doing the actual negotiation rather than any of the politicians getting involved. And, of course, you've got serious problems there because you've got civil servants who were largely, the whole civil service pretty much was for Remain. So you've still got these people working in there. They're not necessarily going to be that easy to get rid of. But I would think if anyone can do it, people like Steve Baker and David Davis can do that. So, I mean, I can't predict whether or not it's going to be successful. But the key is going to be making sure that we are not under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, because although, of course, it helps to have European human rights law, that's not the same jurisdiction as the European Court of Justice, that they would rule on things like trade rules. So, for example, Jeremy Corbyn said he wanted to nationalise the water industry. Well, the water industry is quite able to go to the European Court of Justice and say, well, we're going to fight this through the courts. We're not going to let them nationalise us. So, I mean, at least we're not going to have to be dealing with that straight away. But we need to be out of that European court to enable any future British government to actually do what it wants in the country and to change things in a positive way. But I'd say the most important thing that we need to be doing is really looking at turning the banking system into a utility run by the Treasury or run by accountable people in the public interest, because we could see an enormous renaissance through bank loans of industry, and to allow entrepreneurs to get on and, by providing things like cheap workshop space, by having a reset in the housing market so people are not paying all their wages in rent and mortgages, we could actually have some sort of economic renaissance. But the key to that is the Governor of the Bank of England. Obviously, Mark Carney, when he's replaced, we need to keep a very, very close eye on whose that is. I'd like to see, Mervyn King brought back, because although he was responsible for this terrible 2008 crisis, the guy has been very, humiliated by it and humbled by it, and he's now come up with all sorts of great ideas and interesting things that we could be doing in the economy to actually get a flat economy, make sure that people are not basically, look, in a nutshell, that the financial system works for people, not people working for the financial system, to turn what we've got right now for the vast majority of people who are effectively wage slaves, to turn that system on its head, Richie. Yeah. And if anyone could do it, Mervyn King could. I mean, I think he's a very, very worthwhile guy. He's come up with lots and lots of sensible stuff over the last 4 or 5 years, and he's called it right every time, as far as I can see, apart from 2008, where he learnt rather a nasty lesson.
He certainly did. Tony, thanks for coming back on today. The Politics Show, Bcfm, Fridays, you don't want to miss it. Thisweek.org.uk. If you've never heard of the Bilderberg Group, go to bilderberg.org. It is the archive for everything Bilderberg as well. Love having you on, mate. Thanks for doing that today. I really appreciate it. And you got it spot
the other
on.
thing I'm digging into, of course, is Martin Bormann, Hitler's secretary, the treasurer of the Nazi Party, and his very close relationship with Winston Churchill, amazingly. And Churchill's name is mud. If you read a lot of the stuff that we've been digging out, you'll find Churchill was really just dealing with the Nazis for the last year of the war to take all their money and give it to organised crime.
When first of all, Merry Christmas, by the way. No. When you were on, not last time, but the time before that, you mentioned Bormann. Let's, in the new year, when you're ready to go, let's have a show on that. Let's do 45 minutes to an hour, because it is hugely interesting. It's brilliant work by you. I want to get into that. And Merry Christmas to you and everybody at BCFM. The show is great. I'm glad you're doing it. There's nothing like it in the UK, on UK radio anywhere. And thanks for coming on in 2019 and sharing your time with us. I really appreciate it, too.
You know what, Richie? There's nothing like you either.
You're a gent.
Right. And Merry Christmas to you and all your listeners. God bless.
Cheers, mate. Bye for now. The brilliant Tony Gosling. Thisweek.org.uk. BCFM, the Politics Show, Fridays. Don't miss it. Love that guy. It's exactly 30 seconds past 6. We better take a wee breather. Lots to do. We've got to go to Ireland shortly. We're going to speak to Diane Denizen, and I know you're going to like hearing from Diane. Hope I've pronounced Diane's surname correctly too. I should have asked her. Back in a minute.
Renowned healer Mark Biersky travels the world to find the most unique and powerful crystals for self-healing. Since the ancient times, crystals have been used as healing tools. They hold a natural healing vibration and are highly charged in positive energy. Mark teaches how to channel the universal energy and transfer it to the crystal to activate its healing power. Each crystal is used for its unique ability to target a different physical or emotional challenge. Mark Biersky is an author, healer, speaker, and founder of the Pure Energy Healing Academy. He shares powerful messages of inspiration and healing on his daily YouTube videos, reaching millions worldwide. Mark's crystals, healing oils, and incense sticks are most sought after by other healers. His collection is available online at www.markbiersky.com. His work is presented through Lemon House, a company that creates and curates consciously made gifts.
Right, welcome back to the programme. We're coming up for 2 minutes past 6. We're off to Ireland real soon to speak to Diane. It is Monday's Richie Allen Show. It is the 16th of December 2019, which means we're what then? We're 9 days, are we? 9 days away from Christmas Day. By the way, just to let you know, people are putting it about that I'm taking 2 weeks off. I'm not. I finish on the 23rd. Right, no show on Christmas Eve. Then we have New Year's Eve. Then we have the 1st, which is a holiday. The 2nd of January is a Thursday. I'm not going to come back on the 2nd. I'll come back on the Sunday. A couple of days later for Sunday View on January the 5th, alright? So it's a little break for me, but it's not a long break. That's how it's going to go. Next Monday, by the way, there won't be any guests. It'll be me and you, some Christmas songs, and I'm opening the Skype and opening the phone line so that you can say whatever the bloody hell you want to say for the last radio show of the year. How does that sound? Sounds pretty good to me. It's over to FSN for the headlines.
From Feature Story News in London, I'm Ollie Barrett. Protests have continued in India for a 6th day over a controversial immigration bill. Chuck Schumer, the top Democrat in the US Senate, says White House aides should testify in the expected impeachment trial for Donald Trump. Newly elected MPs are at the UK's Parliament after last week's general election, which saw the Conservatives secure a majority. And Russia's preparing for the final test launches of a nuclear weapons system that could fly over the North Pole and strike targets anywhere in the world.
There you are. It's Russian fear-mongering again on the news, is it? I suppose it is. Can't go a couple of days without scare stories about the Russians. Back to the future, eh? Right. We're live on Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, triggerwarning.tv, multiple other platforms. You can always hear the programme on richieallen.co.uk. That's where you can hear the programme. Here's a tune from the Dandy Warhols. It's the Dandy Warhols. And we're off to Ireland next to speak to Diane Denizen. I'm really looking forward to that one. Lovely jubbly. The most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show. Nothing like it in the world. And my name is Richie Allen, the BBG, not the BBC. Right, music from the Dandy Warhols on the Richie Allen Show. It's coming up for 6 minutes past the hour. Welcome to the programme if you're just joining us. I'm really thrilled about meeting my next guest because we've been chatting from time to time on social media. And she's got a really fascinating story to tell, not just about herself, but about moving to Ireland to go off grid, changing the lifestyle completely. And I'm really interested in that. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Now, before we do that, she's been observing, I suppose, the coverage on this particular programme of issues around transgenderism probably for a couple of years. And just to remind you, I covered extensively last week a report by Sky News about psychotherapists leaving the NHS and warning that children were being even overdiagnosed, okay, and were being given puberty blocking drugs. And some of the psychotherapists, psychologists who were leaving the service said that this is wrong, but they were scared about speaking up about it because they feared being branded transphobic. And it really is a real explosion in recent years of children identifying as, boys identifying as girls and vice versa, and people saying that they were born in the wrong body. It's a big thing, and we've come at it from a lot of different angles. And I'm really delighted that I'll be talking about this with Diane today. She began the project that she's still, I suppose, running today back in the mid-1990s in Ireland, having left Wales. And about 5 years ago, since 5 years ago, has been fully off the electricity grid. They have a small high-speed wind turbine and a solar with diesel generator backup as well. Now, during the time that Diane went to Ireland, or from the time she went to Ireland up to about 2000, she underwent gender transition. She's a transgender woman, and I want to talk about that as well. I'm delighted that Diane Denizen is on the Richie Allen radio show. Diane, am I pronouncing your surname right for a start? How are you?
That's actually just my handle on Twitter.
Ah, right. So there you are. Yeah. It sounded real to me. So yeah, I've been saying all day long, it's Diane Denizen. First of all, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate that. It's nice to know you. It's nice to hear you, having been observing you on Twitter and observing your comments. Have I been fair in talking about this particular issue? Talking to a transgender woman now, and I'd love to hear about your own experience. But before that, have I been fair or have I not been? Are there things you'd like to say about the coverage of it on this programme?
Well, the thing is, it's not a case of me being transgendered. I'm a post-op transsexual, which is a different thing. Transgender is sort of a made-up social construct term. It's not. It doesn't have any basis in a medical diagnosis. You know, it's just something that people say, oh, well, you know, I feel like a boy today or a girl the next day. It's not really got any basis to it in science. It's just people identifying. And the problem is that, particularly with the kids, I've done a little bit of research on it, and the puberty blockers actually, the FDA have recognised that there's been 6,000 plus deaths from puberty blockers, and it's like puberty is a very important part of your life because it's where you go from being a child to being an adult, and you need that. You actually need that. I was looking it up the other day. Actually, the puberty hormones cause the brain to mature, and without that, you would never develop as a mature adult. So basically what the puberty blockers are doing is keeping them as kids. I understand the principle of it, but I don't think it's right.
Now, 6,000, Diane, and that came from the FDA, did it? So
yeah, it did.
That's 6,000 young people who have been put on. And have they died because of a reaction to the puberty blockers, or have some of them, God help them, have they taken their own lives? How does that work?
It seems to be related to the puberty blockers because they're blocking puberty, and the human body needs to go through that process.
Right.
You know, if it doesn't, I mean, you know, things don't develop. Like your skeleton doesn't develop properly, the muscles don't develop properly, the brain function doesn't develop towards adulthood. So basically, they remain immature humans, you know.
And it has physical effects on the body that can lead to illness, and that can then lead to death, and that's where the 6,000 is coming from.
It seems that way, yeah.
Wow, Diane, that's incredible, that, isn't it? I mean, Sky, there's no mention of, I'm not doubting you for a second because I know you're doing your research on this, no mention of that number on Sky's report last week, which was very interesting. So I'm fascinated by your own story, and we can talk a little bit about that if you want. Thanks for correcting me, by the way. Not transgender. You had a full transition, so you described yourself as a transsexual. We'll talk about that in a second. What do you think is happening then, that so many youngsters are saying that they think they were born in the wrong body and are expressing this, which must be fairly terrifying? I certainly don't take it lightly. I know it might come across sometimes as I do, but I don't. It must be a difficult time for them. And they express that to their parents, and then they end up in the clinic in London, and they get the puberty blocking drugs, which, you know, seem to be seem to be very dangerous for them. Why do you think it is that so many children are now expressing themselves in this way? What's your take on that?
I don't really know. I think, like, my son's grown up. He's 30 odd, and he's home in his relationship. But my friend has kids. They sort of, boys sort of 12, and the girl's 15, and they're getting inundated in school with the climate change narrative, and also this whole gender thing is being pushed in school. Now, the thing is, these kids have, a kid of that age, in that sort of age group, has a very, their minds are very plastic, and they can be moulded by propaganda quite easily, like we see with the Greta Thunberg thing. Yeah. I mean, all the followers are young people. You don't see adults taking any notes of it. It's like, what is this girl on about? She's obviously not done her research. So it's a young person's thing, and I don't really understand it. Kind of like a mass hysteria, and that's where it seems to be coming from. It seems to be driven. I wouldn't discount the eugenics side of things either, because of course, if these kids are going through this treatment, they're going to be sterile afterwards, and if their puberty is blocked, they may never develop their gonads properly, so they may end up sterile after that anyway, even if they come off the puberty blockers. So it just seems to be a weird sort of social phenomenon more than anything.
I heard a lovely word the other day that I hadn't heard for ages: malleable. You mentioned there about the minds of youngsters, and they are malleable. Yeah, and I can imagine if you talk enough to children about gender, and if you express to children enough times that, well, you could be this and you might be that, and you mightn't even know yet, it's easy to see how you could confuse them. I'm fascinated that you are prepared to consider maybe eugenics, maybe being a part of it. I've considered that as well. I certainly have. Let me remind our listeners, Diane is on the line to us from Ireland. Diane, where exactly are you? You're somewhere between Port Lorga and Cork, or you're inside Port Lorga. I think you're inside Waterford, are you?
No, we're actually 5 miles west of Macroom.
Ah, you're 5 miles west of Macroom in Cork, right? Fair enough, yeah. And I want to talk about this in a minute. This project, fascinated by this. Your own story, then. You're would I say transsexual woman? Is that what I would say now? Is that what I should say to describe you, or just describe you as Diane? I could just do that as well. Just Diane. But just Diane, right?
I mean, that's what my friends call.
That's what your friends call you. But because it seems to be so important now, when did you, without getting too deep into it, when did you think to yourself when you were younger, well, I'm different? When were you aware that that you weren't, I don't even want to put words in your mouth, was it that you weren't comfortable in your body? You tell me.
From my earliest recollection, really, but it was when I went to school and mixing with boys and girls, I tended to gravitate more towards the girls, and I detested ball sports. I mean, to me, my main sports when I was young was cycling, archery, shooting, and judo.
Right.
Those were the things I did. Anything sort of kicking a ball around or smacking a ball around,
that was difficult growing up in Wales, right? Very difficult growing up in Wales, the rugby capital of the world, or one of them anyway. So you didn't have any interest in ball sports, right? So you gravitated towards the girls. I'm fascinated. So we're talking now. I don't want to be giving your age away. I don't want to be rude, but we're talking the 70s. We're talking the 70s, right?
No, 60s.
We're talking the 60s, right? So, and you're gravitating towards the girls, right? Go ahead. This is fascinating now.
I had more female friends in school than male, and I just felt more comfortable around girls. And I got constant ridicule from some of the sort of less intelligent lads. Oh, you can't kick a fucking ball.
Yeah.
You're like a fucking girl, which sort of, in a way, sort of reinforced, well, obviously, if I'm bloody useless at ball sports, that would probably, put me on the female side of the spectrum, So it was kind of reinforced as well through that. But on the flip side of it, I was always kind of tomboyish, you might say.
Right.
I always liked going up into the woods and putting swings in trees, and like I said, my sports were cycling, shooting, and judo, which was sort of action sports, more action sport than what you would get in ball sports. And we used to go mountain biking before there were mountain bikes. It was that sort of thing. I mean, we used to do some crazy stuff, but it was just, I suppose, I've always been drawn by exciting things, not sort of mundane. I think, most ball sports, you look at cricket, I know you like cricket, but
I like
you
it,
look at cricket, it's so boring to watch, I think.
Yeah, most people I know agree with you. They think I'm crazy for for watching it. So at what point then did you then, I suppose in your teens, did you begin to dress more effeminately? Was it noticed, Diane? Did mum and dad say, what's going on? How did that work exactly?
No. The family environment would not have been sort of leaning towards that sort of tolerance. No. To survive in the environment I was in at the time, because it's going back a good few years now, I basically had to shut up and harden up.
Right. And any time I've ever spoken to, whether it's a transsexual or a transgender man or woman from the 60s or 70s, even gay men and women from the 60s and 70s, it was a rotten time, let's be honest about it. There's no two ways about that. I get justifiable stick when I say these days that, it's a great world to be in if you're LGBT yourself in this era, because, the majority of people quite rightly don't care. But these were difficult times, Diane, weren't they? I mean, these were times when there was no tolerance whatsoever, really.
No, not at all.
So obviously then you left home and kind of made your way in the world. And was that it then for you? Kind of entering adulthood, was that when you could be, when you could express yourself and talk about how you felt and take steps to do something about it? When did that happen?
Well, it was sort of around 36, 38.
Is that right?
The gender dysphoria started to get very, very, I don't think onerous is the right word. It weighed on me. You sort of get halfway through your life, if you like, and you're sort of going, shit, I've lived my life for everybody else, so my parents, think well of me, and my relatives think well of me, and the person I've deprived of myself is me.
Yeah.
So, you sort of get midway to your life. I suppose you could almost call it like a midlife crisis type thing. And I went to see a doctor in the town, and she was very sympathetic. But then I discovered that there were actually no services that the Southern Health Board provided.
None.
And none whatsoever.
And this is in Ireland now in the early 1990s.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So now we're into the early and had you, and if I'm being personal now, tell me to piss off and I'll piss right off, and we'll move on to something else. But had you married a woman? Because you mentioned that you have a son. So had you been married, Diane? You had been married.
Yeah, we're still married.
You're still married, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I say, of course, I didn't know that. That's terrific. That's really interesting. I'm joining the dots here. Right. So you arrive in Ireland, and very little for our listeners, the Southern Health Board. Ireland has regional health boards, south east, the north east, the north. You have a southern one. Very little help for anybody like Diane at all. But you found a sympathetic GP, and you mentioned gender dysphoria, because you mentioned this to me when I asked you to give me a little bio. Is that what you thought was going on then, or do you still think that's what's going on? Is gender dysphoria, is it a real thing? Do you want to talk about that now? Is that what you think you were dealing with?
Well, at the time I was working with Neil Crowley from the Quality Authority on a document to access healthcare for transsexual people, because there was none.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a starting point. And as I say, there was nothing. I think there were a couple of people who did get treatment in the northwestern area, But the rest of the country was pretty well, there wasn't anything. So I was talking to the Equality Authority about it. I had some great help from a girl from Donegal as well, who's fantastic. She had a great legal mind. And she gave me a lot of guidance on the document that we ended up producing with the Equality Authority. But
well, by the way, congratulations on that. I didn't know you had anything to do with any of that. That's a brilliant thing. That you should be very. I'm not. I wouldn't dare. You know what the program is like. I wouldn't dare patronise you. I think that's a fantastic thing. That. How difficult was it, Diane? No, go ahead. You were going to say something on that because it's important. Go ahead.
Yeah, it needed to be dealt with because that was the main stumbling block to actually progressing with it. I had great help from Margaret O'Regan, who's a GP down in Cork, and she specialised in treating transsexual people. She was very intuitive, actually, and 6 months after I'd been seeing her for psychotherapy, she said, right, we're going to try on an anti-androgen now and see what happens. So she was keeping an open mind all the way through, even when she'd kind of done I fitted the diagnostic criteria, so she was pretty sure. But she said, we'll put you on anti-androgen, see what happens. Anyway, I took this anti-androgen, which was called Androcur. And within a week, I felt totally different. I felt much better. The dysphoric feeling had gone. Because the testosterone now wasn't actually getting into my system. And I felt lighter. I lost weight. My health increased dramatically, actually, after that. And then I went back to see Margaret after a month, and she said, how do you feel? I said, fantastic. She said, great. She said, now we know for sure that you are suffering from gender dysphoria, because she said, if you came back and said to me, oh, I feel dreadful, this medication's not working with me, she said, then we'd have had to have gone back and looked at more psychotherapy to find out really what was going on. And I don't think that's what's happening with these young people. Right. They're rushing them through treatment rather than really getting a good, solid diagnosis that there is gender dysphoria. I did read something the other day as well. A lot of these children, there's been a research project, I think in Australia, and a lot of these children are turning out to be on the autism spectrum.
No, I saw that too.
So they're not actually suffering from gender dysphoria, it's something else. And the thing is, if you don't do the psychotherapy, you're not going to get to the bottom of it, and they could make a terrible mistake. Because of course, if you're not suffering from gender dysphoria and you have sex reassignment surgery and all the hormone treatment, then when you come out the other side, you're going to be getting gender dysphoria because you're going to be in the wrong body. Isn't
this incredible? I'm so glad, Diane, we're talking about this today and with you because of your experience. I really am. By the way, Noel Crowley, you mentioned, would you believe, is a first cousin of Jean Ann? Would you believe that? There you are. What a small,
really?
Honest to God, yeah. Ireland is tiny,
really?
Right?
He's a lovely man.
Is that, and you spoke very highly of him there. Is Jean Ann Crowley's first cousin? Yeah. It is a small world. Let me just remind our listeners, Diane is on the line from just outside Macroom in County Cork. And she's an amazing story to tell, really. Grown up in the 60s and 70s in Wales, coming to Ireland in the early 1990s, dealing with gender dysphoria, playing a very active role, Diane, in getting legislation, getting people to understand what this is, getting the medical fraternity in Ireland to understand what it is in the early 1990s while she was there. We've been talking about why Diane feels that there's something very wrong with the approach today to youngsters here in the UK, particularly when they're expressing difficulty with their gender identity. And Diane has talked, I think, very eloquently about the problems with puberty blocking drugs, and thousands of children have died because of medical complications, because, as Diane said, going through puberty is very important for your physical and mental well-being later on in life. This is hugely important, folks. Diane did mention earlier on, by the way, that she thinks, eugenics might be a part of this as well. Whenever people say things like that, I know some people are uncomfortable with it. They think, oh, that's a stretch. That it actually isn't a stretch. I don't believe. I don't believe it is a stretch. I meant to ask you, Diane. We seem to be we focused on the UK because there's so much information in the UK press about it. But you did mention friends and family in Ireland. It's happening in Ireland, but we just don't hear about it in the media. At least I've not read any stories. But do you think we are going to see an explosion of problems with teenagers in Ireland in the coming years, because the puberty blockers are going to be rolled out there as well on the scale that we're seeing it here in the UK? Or is it already happening on that scale in Ireland? Do we know?
I don't actually know, but I would imagine, as usual, Ireland will follow the UK after a few years. It's the usual thing. It's probably going to happen, and it's a bit of a concern, because if there isn't gender dysphoria, it's going to be devastating. If they go through that process and they come out the other side and then they go, oh, I don't feel any better, it's going to be devastating. I mean, it's going to ruin the rest of their lives. And of course, they won't be able to have children, because between the hormones and the surgery, you end up sterile after it. So,
tell me
very
this.
Scary, actually.
It is scary, yeah. And we'll come back to that. We've got loads of time, thank God. You had the surgery. So, why did you have the surgery? Why? I shouldn't say that. Why was it the right thing for you, Diane? If you want to move on from that, go on.
It's kind of like the finishing touches, because, like, obviously, if you identify as female and you don't have the surgery, basically the best you can say about yourself is that you're a transvestite.
Right.
That's the reality of it. But once you've had the surgery, when you look in the mirror, you can actually look back at yourself and go, yeah, now I feel complete. I feel like a whole person. Whereas before, you were always looking at your body going, it's just not right.
Right.
I think that's the easiest way to describe it.
So, you get a lot of, you see, Manchester, of course, with Canal Street and the city centre, it's a very high-profile destination for LGBT men and women. And Manchester would have a big transgender population. I know it does. And they're very social. So you've got a lot of what look very much like young women, but they would still have their penis. And I'm fascinated by that, more so than ever now, because of what you said. Are those transgender women, those men, I know I've been rude about this in the past, and maybe I shouldn't have been, but men who identify as women, but they have their penis, are they maybe not entirely convinced? And I don't say that flippantly, or I don't say it to be silly or to be crass. Do you think maybe they're not entirely sure of what's going on? I wonder.
Know. I don't know. I've come across a few things over here. Someone who identified as female and lived as a woman, but didn't have surgery, and I just didn't understand where they were going with it. And another one I came across as well was someone who didn't have any psychotherapy at all. They went abroad for the surgery, where you didn't actually need to produce a psychiatrist report.
Wow.
And they had the surgery, and basically it turned out pretty badly. I mean, the surgery turned out great, and they had cosmetic surgery, what they call facial feminization surgery as well, and some breast augmentation. They looked fine, but psychologically I don't think they were ready for it, because they hadn't really been through a real-life test, which is part of the diagnostic criteria. And they came back to Ireland and delivered this as a fait accompli to everybody, and it didn't end up very well.
You would have been horrified then, based on what you just said, Diane. By the way, we've got Diane on, who's in Cork at the moment. It's 27.5 minutes to the top of the hour. Delighted to be hearing from Diane today, especially, I'm not virtue signalling here, because I've gotten to know Diane on Twitter over the last couple of years, and I did say about a year ago, you should come on. And I meant it when I said it, by the way. I meant it. It wasn't one of those, one of those insincere Irish things. I meant it when I said it, because this is an important issue. I'm so glad you're here today. It's really good to have you on the programme. Lots of comments about this on Twitter. A lot of people saying they're amazed at how thoughtful and Diane is, and how thought-provoking this conversation is. Was it difficult for you first of all, you mentioned, you gave an excellent answer when I asked you why did you have the surgery. So you obviously never regretted it at all. No. Obviously not. You've thrived ever since then. Now, it's important as well, when the Liberal Democrats were running around saying that we should introduce the new era of self-identification without having to go and see the psychotherapist. Now, I know you've already answered this, but I want to stay with this for a minute, because you feel this is really important, don't you? You feel it's very dangerous if, people going through what you went through don't get the psychological help. You think that's, well, you said it earlier on, it could be fatal.
Well, you see, over the years, like this, gender reassignment started, I think, after the Second World War. There was some experimental surgery, and slowly doctors were starting to get a feel for it, because what they had was a lot of people, well, not massive numbers, but a lot of people who were going through the system, and they were independently reporting the same feelings, the same sort of very similar life stories, the same problems growing up with their gender identity. So the doctors were slowly sort of building a picture of what it would take to make a full diagnosis of this condition. So the people who went through the system very early did a great job of explaining to the doctors how they felt, and they kept a consistent story, all of them, independently, which allowed the doctors to realise that, yeah, there's something going on here that we need to look at. Now, back in the 90s, the early 90s, there was some research done by Gosling in Belgium, I think it was, or the Netherlands, somewhere that sort of neck of the woods. And what they found, they took years to do this research because they had to wait for transsexual people to die. That's morbid, I know.
Is that right, but, yeah? That's how serious it was. That's how serious it was. They were so in the dark about what was going on. That's what it took, basically.
They were trying to find out if there was any sort of biological marker. And what they found is in the BSTC region in the base of the brain, which is past the hypothalamus, they found in all transsexuals that they had, these were all male to female, by the way, they found that they all had this BSTC region of similar dimensions and similar, in the male, the BSTC region is very defined. And it's quite easy to see if you get it under a microscope and it's been stained. You can see it. It's like a little island sort of sitting there. And in females and male to female transsexuals, they found that it wasn't well defined. Now, they didn't say, they said it seems to be a marker, but they couldn't figure out why. So they just reported this, and it has since been replicated, this research, where they found this BSTC region seems to be a marker, but they don't know why it's a marker. It just seems to be what it is. So that seems to be something that's pointing towards differences in the brain.
Will it be accepted, I wonder, in this kind of era of, like the psychotherapists in the NHS, they said they were terrified of, talking about the therapy and not going on the drugs, lest they be labelled as transphobic. You wonder how difficult it might be, Diane, in the near future to present this research, to get it peer-reviewed when people seem to be scared of putting their heads above the parapet and saying, well, look, we found this or we found that. That's a concern at the moment, isn't it?
Well, I think that's the frightening thing about it. It seems to be an agenda, rather than sticking with the science and what we really do know at this stage. Because, like I said, it's been nearly 70 years now that the doctors have been treating transsexual people. So, they've got a fairly good handle on what it's about. But where does this fit in with this transgender phenomenon and all these young people all of a sudden coming out of the woodwork saying that they feel that they're the opposite sex?
And more girls there. And you made a very good point a moment ago. It was, predominantly male to female. But the thing that the thing that the Sky News report made very clear the other day is that so many girls now are expressing themselves as having identity issues and identifying as male, and that's just it's completely and utterly baffling. That, so there must be something going on. We talked about the malleable minds of the very young, and I suppose in this kind of environment that we live in now, this social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram environment where everything is a few characters, it's very difficult to have a rational discussion with anybody, isn't it? About anything, let alone about this, obviously about this very serious issue. I just want to clarify something with you, by the way. You talked about your friend. You talked about your friend who went overseas to have the surgery and came back, and you said it didn't. Life wasn't great afterwards. I just wanted to clarify. I understood that to mean that it was because your friend didn't have the psychological help from the professionals that you had and that people should have. I think that's what you were hinting at. Yeah, pretty much.
They didn't follow the protocol. They just up and went and
had it, and then was very unhappy.
The protocol is there to protect you from making a mistake. That's why it's there. And if they're rushing through, and I heard the other day of some doctor who wrote a script for, I think it was testosterone injections, without even seeing the person.
Spot on.
That is criminally negligent.
Dreadful. That was part of the Sky News report. That's right. They gave a testosterone prescription over the phone to somebody they never saw.
That's crazy.
That is absolutely crazy. I mean, I don't care what it is. If it's a chest infection, no doctor should say to you over the phone, "Oh, you have a chest infection, do you? Well, I'll send you." No, you should be seen. Absolutely right, Diane. Diane is our guest. There's been a lot of comments on this, and really, really important. William in Scotland says it's confusing just hearing this tale. My heart goes out to those who are in the same boat as Diane was in, but I think William is saying, particularly now as they're not getting the help, they're not going through the protocol, as Diane said, and that's going to be hugely problematic for many men, young men and young women going forward. The upshot is, Diane, that after going through the protocol, the surgery was absolutely the right thing for you, but a lot of people are going to have the surgery and it may not be the right thing for them. And in fact, didn't some men and women who'd had the surgery, didn't they go on didn't they do a piece with the Guardian newspaper a couple of years ago where they said they found it very difficult to get a hearing on TV and radio because they wanted to express regret at having had the surgery, but they couldn't get arrested, let alone get an interview on BBC Radio 5 Live. And again, that's incredibly worrying. I mean, if you want to talk about this, give everybody the airtime. Everybody. Speak to people like you.
That makes you think it's an agenda rather than something that's happening naturally or organically. It seems to be an agenda. Like I made the comparison earlier on with the climate change. There's a narrative, there's an agenda to this. And it's the same, I think, with this whole transgender thing, that there seems to be a narrative behind it and there seems to be an agenda. Now, what the end result of that agenda is, I haven't got a clue. But it seems to be driven in a certain direction rather than it's happening naturally and organically.
It's negligent, absolutely right. It's negligent in the extreme that teenagers are being talked about, are being involved in conversations about this, but they're not being shown, testimonies like your own, Diane. That's terribly, terribly wrong. That you would say, oh yeah, you can self-identify, don't worry about that, you don't have to see anybody, and if you need the puberty blockers, we'll organise it. And yet they know that there are people like you in the world, experienced men and women like yourself, Diane, who understand it, who've gone through the entire process, came out the other side of it happy and healthy, but yet it seems like they will go a pretty long way in keeping opinions like yours from reaching those that they want to impress with this agenda. That's all that worries me, really. That's the thing.
That's why it seems like an agenda.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The really worrying thing, actually, is when you go male to female, because if you do it post-puberty, if you stop the hormones and stop the anti-androgen, you will basically revert to male, because testosterone is a very, very powerful hormone. Estrogen is a little bit softer, let's say. Now, these girls who are taking testosterone, what will happen is that they will start to masculinize pretty quickly. They'll get facial hair growth, their hairline will recede, they'll get muscular building and things like that. Once they've been through that process of the testosterone, it's very, very, very hard to reverse it, because testosterone is a very effective and strong hormone. So those girls need to be, more so than the boys going through this, the girls need to be really considering the long-term effect, because it's almost impossible to turn it back.
Thanks for talking to us about that, right? Hugely, hugely important. There's no doubt I think we'll talk again on this in the future. If you've got somebody if you've got pre-teens or if you've got teenagers and they're interested in these issues, you really should take this conversation with Diane and play it to them and give them another angle, because I'm not convinced, well, I'm pretty sure that when these issues are being discussed in high schools, nobody is saying what Diane has said, and Diane has lived it and has more of a right to talk about it than most. So I'm really glad that you came on finally, Diane, to talk about it. I'm also absolutely fascinated by you leaving Wales. There's not a trace of Cork accent, by the way. Makes me laugh that. You've been in Cork for 24 years or thereabouts, and it's the most unique accent in the world. I mean, there's nothing like the Cork accent. I'm not even going to attempt to do it, but I used to take the mickey out of a Corkman I knew in Spain, the very lilting up and down accent. But you've been in Cork for 24 years and you wanted to live off grid, so obviously, and you've talked about climate change, and again I see you on Twitter, the environment and sustainability and our impact on the environment, if we leave climate change to one side, it must be very important to you.
It is, actually, yeah. This whole climate change thing is just an agenda. It's got nothing to do with reality. We're actually going into a cooling period, like the Maunder-Dalton minimum that happened in history. We seem to be going into a cooling period, and I've seen the pictures from the satellites of the sun, and it's pretty dead, to be honest. There's not an awful lot of solar flares or anything. So the sun is slowing down, so it's going to get colder. So this is going to destroy the global warming narrative altogether.
Blow it out of the water. But you make a great distinction, and I do follow you on Twitter. You make a distinction between destroying the environment, filthying up the oceans. These are terrible things. But you don't. Well, most people do, sadly. They've linked us being dirty and poisoning the planet in ways that we do. They've linked that to climate change, but they've got nothing to do with one another, right?
No. I mean, the biggest polluters, and when I say polluters, I mean the ones really polluting, releasing chemicals into the atmosphere, into the water. The corporations, it's not individual people.
Yeah.
It's the corporations that are doing all this. It's the corporations that are ripping down the rainforest. It's they say, oh, human caused. It's not humans that are causing this. It's corporations.
So why would it be so? I mean, you're very proud of the fact you don't use electricity. You have your own sustainable way of generating it yourself. Tell us a little bit about your way of life there. I genuinely am fascinated by it because it's very similar in some ways to my friend Jean-Anne Crowley, who lives kind of an off-grid existence, maybe not as much as yourself, but in Cleggan, in the west of Ireland as well. And you mentioned a phrase to me that I'd never heard until last year when Jean-Anne mentioned it to me, woofer. And a woofer, I believe, is a worker that comes along. Tell us about your place, Diane. Tell us, because it looks and sounds amazing. You've got a website and everything. Go on. Tell us about it.
Yeah. Well, we were looking to do this in Wales back in the sort of late 80s, early 90s. But you had that holiday home phenomenon in Wales where, middle-class English people were coming in and buying the property, and that really, they could always outbid us. So all the little rural houses were just sold off for holiday homes, which made the project unworkable because of the cost of the initial setup just to buy a house and a little bit of land. Anyway, a friend of ours said, oh, well, you could always move to France or Ireland. So I thought, I kind of don't fancy France too much. You've got the language to deal with, and you have to deal with all the authorities in a different language, which would be kind of awkward. So we thought, we'll go over to Ireland and have a look. So we came over for a drive around and liked the look of the place and found the estate agents were selling places for like some as low as 15,000 or even less in some parts, like in Leitrim, you could pick up a place for a couple of thousand. Of course, that's all changed now. But we came over a couple of times, and on the last trip over, we had a guy in Skibbereen, Matt O'Sullivan. He was keeping an ear open for property. And anyway, we were just about to go back, and I phoned him, and he says, oh, great, I'm glad you phoned. He said, I think we found your place. He said, it's just outside Macroom. He described it, sounded good. So we drove out to Macroom, asked directions, found the place easy enough, and I walked to the top of the field, and I looked over towards Mulliganish and the hills, and I thought, this is bloody heaven,
wow.
It's beautiful, lovely. And the land was sloping, so it would drain well. There was a nice high point where we could put the wind turbine, which was sort of our original idea of using wind, but overall wind doesn't work out all that well, to be honest, and these industrial wind turbines, they're going to be a disaster. They damage birds, they kill bats, insects are getting killed by the billion sort of thing.
Yeah.
So they're not going to work in the long term. It's just that, again, we come down to an agenda. It's the state's agenda to allow this sort of development. Like with 5G, they want to allow 5G without any safety checking, without checking the science behind either of these things, and that's why it's all turning pretty shitty, to be honest.
It's turning pretty shitty. And look, I think we'll talk about that again, you and me, on this programme, I have no doubt. But I want to stay with you there. This paradise that you arrived in 93 or 90... When did you
94.
arrive? 94 you arrived, right? So you arrived in 94. So you had this lovely bit of land. Sounds very Irish, lovely bit of land. Can't beat it. And so you lovely sloping for the drainage, beautiful views and all of that. And so did you start to grow stuff, Diane? Did you have to build accommodation for yourself? Tell us about this. I'm all ears here.
Well, the house needed renovating. The roof needed doing. There was a lot of internal work that needed doing. It needed wiring. There was no plumbing at all in the house.
Did you have any idea how to do any of that? Did you or your wife have any clue how to do any of that at all? Or?
Well, yeah, I'm an engineer, so I'm an electrical engineer, but I taught myself to do plumbing, basically.
Right.
And a bit of woodwork, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I got fairly good at most things, really. So we lived in a caravan for the first sort of 18 months, and we did the renovation work ourselves.
Wow.
The only thing we didn't do was the roof, because I just couldn't figure out roofing at all. So we got some local lads to do the job, and they were fantastic. They didn't charge us a great deal for it.
That was lovely. Now, I can only imagine what it must have been like locally with you and your family being there. I mean, you must have been the talk of Cork, Diane. We know what Irish people are like. I mean, Jesus, it must have been some laugh in the pubs around in 1994. You see your woman over there and her wife and all this sort of stuff going on, you know? I'd say they were mad. They must have been turning up all the time, were they, to see what you were doing? I'd say they were well nosy.
No, not really.
Were they not?
Not really. There's a lot of people around here who live. Most of them are not off-grid, but they are self-sufficient in a big way. I mean, we only do chickens. We have done pigs in the past, but we only do chickens for eggs and meat.
Right.
And these other people, I mean, there's one guy up the road from us. He's a broad-based engineer, fantastic guy, very, very knowledgeable, and he does pigs, sheep, cows. He used to grow his own veg. He doesn't seem to do the veg so much now, because I suppose it's so cheap in the supermarkets, you know.
But you do now, don't you, Dan? You grow. What do you grow? Tell us what you grow.
Anything that'll grow, really.
Right.
Because the climate's not really a good growing climate. Great for spuds, great for onions.
Yeah.
But some of the things like peppers and chilies,
you need greenhouses.
Tomatoes grow fine, but you know, some of the more exotic stuff, it can be very slow to ripen. And like with the chilies, we generally use them green because they just don't turn. So we grow anything we can.
And how much then of how much does that sustain you guys during the entire year? What percentage of what you grow makes up your overall food consumption? You might not know that bloody answer, but I could ask it a more basic way. Does it fulfill most of your food needs for the year? How does it work? Mostly, yeah, except the exotic stuff like the peppers we buy, because we've tried year after year to grow peppers and they don't. The tomatoes we preserve, so we don't actually have to buy tomatoes, you know, like the tinned tomatoes. Yeah. We don't have to buy. You do it yourself. You preserve your own stuff. I'm sure. So you do a lot of that, presumably preserving stuff. Yeah, we do a lot of preserving. Yeah. Wow. I've been asked to put to you. Do you have a small polytunnel? We've got two polytunnels. We've got a big one which is 12 metres, and we've got a small one which is about 7. I'm going to pretend I know what a polytunnel is now. I'm going to try and act all smart. I'm going to try and get away with it. No, I'm kind of guessing. I think I've seen them. They're kind of semicircular things, aren't they? I've seen a polytunnel before. Yeah. Wow, I'm fascinated. And you were going through the gender dysphoria. We talked about all of that. Could you park that to one side? I mean, what was it about you that you went right? Because it sounds like. And you mentioned that your neighbour has an engineering background as well. It sounds like at some stage in your life you said, this is an insane asylum. We live in a very crazy, unsustainable way. Is that what happened to you? Because I mean, it's like a complete paradigm shift. Why? Can you explain that to me so I can understand it? Because I'm fascinated by it. Well, I think it was the early 80s when Thatcher was in the UK, and the country seemed to be going mad. It seemed to be all about money and just a small number of people getting all the money. Yeah. There was it wasn't a level playing field at all, and it was certainly not a meritocracy. You know, you could be a damn genius and you wouldn't get paid any more for it. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So we had to do something because it was not nice. Living under Thatcher was not nice. This sort of Tory posh boy type thing that we've got going on here now, it's not right. It just isn't right. It's not fair. It's not decent. And I mean, you know the story about Thatcher and Savile and
the Tory party in Britain. You're well aware of all that. And it was basically, I want to get away from this because I don't like it. It's toxic. So that was one of the things there's a lot of things that sort of precipitated the move. The property prices, Thatcher's Britain, basically never having any spare money. That was the other thing. So doing something became a real essential thing because we could see living in the UK, we weren't going anywhere. And we certainly couldn't have done this project the way we've done it in Wales. It just would never have started.
And you love it there. Jean-Anne just mentioned to me loads of money, which funny enough, I was thinking of as you were talking there. I don't know if it was Ben Elton who did that, but it beautifully summed up the lunacy of those Thatcher years, that yuppie culture. It was a lunatic asylum. Right, I didn't live through it. I was young at the time. And that was it. You said, I'm not living like this. That's what amazes me, Diane. I mean, you could have went elsewhere and did your engineering and made quite a lot of money. There's no doubt about that. But you said, no, this is no way for a human being to exist. There's something better out there.
Well, I was working for BT at the time on business systems. And I mean, I loved the job. The job was great. The money was okay. But at the end of the day, it was just a career. It was just a career path. And there was not really much room for advancement because I joined the company sort of later on. So there were loads of people ahead of me for any career advancement. So it wasn't going anywhere. And I thought, well, there's got to be a better way of living than this. So that was one of, there's so many factors that sort of came into it.
And you've never looked back, Diane, have you? I mean, do you want to mention the website, by the way? I've not got it here. I should have it here. Because there is a website, folks, that you can check out Diane and what Diane and her family have been doing in just outside Macroom. I've got a pen handy. I'm going to put it up on screen. I'm going to tweet out a link to it anyway. What is it?
Yeah, it's newmoonfarm.ie.
Couldn't be simpler. Lovely name too. Newmoonfarm.ie. Newmoonfarm.ie. Pay Diane a visit there. And it's been 24 years. And it sounds like you've never regretted it, have you?
No, not at all. Not at all. I did work for a little while in the local cinema. I was there 7 years. But this really is my sort of main occupation now, is the gardening, the brewing, the cooking, the engineering bits and bobs.
Did I hear brewing? Did I hear brewing there? I think I heard brewing. So tell us about the beer. Tell us about the beer, Diane. Go on. What do you do? What beer do you do?
We do a variety of beers from kits, and it's the most economical way of doing it, because if you do it from scratch, it's a lot of work. But the kits now, my parents tried the kits back in the 70s, and they weren't all that good. It tasted a bit like vinegar. But now they've really refined the quality of the product, and it's very easy to do.
They're fully grown up now, your children. So what have they done? I mean, you don't have to tell me. They're not on the radio. They might be private people. But are they still around? Did they go off and make their own way? What did they do?
Yeah. Gareth's working, part-time working now with an auctioneers, and he's in college learning auctioneering.
Very good.
And his girlfriend, she's working with a company as an IT web designer, and she's also doing an apprenticeship with him. So they're doing great.
Brilliant. Fantastic, huh?
But of course they are trapped in rental, which is something I wish they could get out of.
Yeah. That and you because I've said it before. 44 years old, and it's 6 months that I managed to get off that. I mean, I'm not thrilled about having a mortgage, obviously. It's an understatement to say I'm not thrilled about having a mortgage. But it's far, far better than trying to find £1,000 a month rent, which was killing us. We had no choice in the end. But
that's just dead money.
Dead money, and I have absolute sympathy for Gareth and for everybody else in his situation. It's a dreadful situation, and of course they're not building houses. They're not doing that. They're not doing it here either. It's absolutely shocking. It's been brilliant, Dan. I can't say just how fascinated I've been listening to that, and how thrilled I am that you came on to talk about obviously the very important issue of the puberty blocking drugs being given to youngsters. That's absolutely hugely important. I think we might talk about that again. It was Neil Crowley as well. I said Noel earlier on, Jean Ann's cousin. I think Jean Ann might drop you a note through the website New Moon Farms, New Moon Farm, even newmoonfarm.ie there. So that's absolutely and you talk about. I mean, Wales. I've been to Wales many times. Wonderful place, lovely place. Do you still have an attachment to Wales, Diane? You know, you will have family there, of course. Do you go back there? Do they come and see you? Are you fond of Wales? Or are you immersed now in Ireland?
Prefer Ireland, to be honest. I really do. Wales is a lovely country, and I've still got a lot of friends over there, and there's some family left. But honestly, I really do prefer Ireland.
It's been an absolute thrill to have you on. Thanks for coming on. It should have happened sooner. I really appreciate it, Diane. No, it's been great to meet you. It really has. Thanks for reaching out to me when you did a couple of years ago on Twitter. Very candidly talking about your own experience and your own story. I don't think there's ever been a more important time for your story to be heard, because there will be a lot of men and women your generation who would have gone through the protocol, as you said, and they need to be heard now. I think you really need to be heard, as when we hear horror stories like we heard last week, when psychiatrists and psychotherapists say we have to leave the service because we don't agree with giving all these puberty blocking drugs, but yet if we stand up we're called transphobic. I think it's really important. Just to reiterate the website, that's newmoonfarm.ie, newmoonfarm.ie. If there's anything else you want to say, Diane, if I cut across you there, if there's anything you wanted to say but maybe you didn't get a chance, you've got the opportunity to do that now. I just want to thank you again for coming on the programme. Well, thanks for having me. And, keep on doing what you're doing, because you're doing a great job, Rich. You're an absolute star for saying that. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. newmoonfarm.ie. Check out Diane. And if you happen to be passing Macroom in County Cork and you fancy picking up some locally brewed beer, I'm sure Diane will do a deal with you on the price. I have no doubt about it whatsoever. Merry Christmas, Diane, to you and yours. And again, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it. Cheers, Rich. Thanks, Diane. What a lovely person Diane is. Fantastic. Live on the line there from just outside Macroom in County Cork. Got to know Diane, as I said, on Twitter a couple of years ago. I won't repeat that again. And I noticed that Diane was very concerned about that which we've been talking about, the over-prescribing of the puberty-blocking drugs to the youngsters. What a fascinating woman Diane is. Also, of course, fascinating for having left Wales in the early 1990s, leaving the job, completely changing their lives and living off-grid and growing their own food, living sustainably just outside Cork. Absolutely fascinating. And thanks to Tony Gosling as well for his analysis of the Corbyn collapse in the first hour. We've gone over time. No bad thing that. Thanks again to you for listening. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time, 5 o'clock. But before that, we'll have the live stream thing, the nonsense on YouTube in the morning. 9:30 in the morning, the nonsense on YouTube. We're going out with Van the Man. It's the only song I could find with Moon in the title. newmoonfarm.ie. Check out Diane. Bye for now.